I'm delighted to present to you our family tree DNA administrator for the Forbes Surname Project, Philip Stead. Just to give you a background on him, he is a tutor in the postgraduate genealogical studies program at the University of Strathclyde. He is a PhD candidate now. He has his master's at the Center for Forensic Science and Center of Lifelong Learning Department of Pure and Applied Chemistry at University of Strathclyde. Philip, you'll notice I took this from your signature. He's also been the administrator for the Family Tree DNA Forbes Surname yDNA project for the last couple of years. He contacted me and I realized he had a whole lot of skills I didn't, so he thankfully agreed to be an administrator for the yDNA project. And as a result, he used his information, the research, to write his paper, his dissertation on Planned Forbes Family History Project. What can yDNA and autosomal DNA analysis conclude on the degree of relatedness among clan members and the ancient origins of the Chiefly line? Now, Philip, could you have come out with a punchier title?
Well, I don't know. I put a lot of thought into that one, so probably not.
Why don't you give a background of why you chose this, and then we'll launch into your presentation. Talk a bit about yourself and how you got into this.
Yeah. So basically, my interest stems from kind of my own genealogy background. I descend from George Seton, the 5th Earl of Winton. Basically, during the Jacobite Rebellion, he backed Bonnie Prince Charlie, and he had to put his son into hiding in Northumberland. And then it kind of all went haywire from there. So he basically got captured. He was put in the Tower of London and then sentenced to death. And he managed to actually escape. But obviously, they lost all their lands and titles. And that's how it all started. So I started getting really interested into kind of noble lineages within Scotland. And obviously tracing my own history and then hitting some brick walls, getting into the kind of genetic side and getting quite a lot of success on breaking down brick walls in my own genealogy. And it stemmed from there. And then I decided to take the plunge and leave my job as a PE teacher and kind of pursue this lecturing. It's kind of just went on from there. And then obviously had quite a few opportunities with the University of Strathclyde, got in touch with Bart, and then it just went from there. And obviously I could see a lot of potential within the Forbes FT DNA project because there was a lot of people that tested. And that's great because if you've got a large sample set, then you can start looking and investigating and develop research questions that you can kind of find answers about. And what we did find was that there is a large kind of variety of different haplotypes, yDNA haplotypes within Clan Forbes and people with the surname Forbes or spelling variants. And this has also been picked up in the Clan Stuarts. I'm also observing this in Clan Hay, which is going to be featuring in the PhD, also with Clan Hamilton. And it's pretty much what we're observing is not everybody of the clan is actually descended from the Chiefly line. So that's really important to emphasize that, you know, just because your DNA match on the yDNA doesn't match the Chiefly line doesn't mean that you're not part of that clan. We're seeing that all the clans are very diverse. So that to me is great because, you know, it just shows that, you know, there's a lot of bigger picture than what's actually going on with just that Chiefly line. But obviously a lot of people are interested to see if they can find that connection. So another part of the thesis was to look to see if there could be any connections made with the autosomal DNA. But because autosomal DNA is so limited, in terms of we can only get back about 300 years with the autosomal DNA. So unless you've got like a really, really recent noble ancestor, it's not going to show up in your matches, or we're not going to be able to pin it down. So that's the unfortunate kind of situation with autosomal DNA. So what you're looking at now, this is basically the results from the big Y. And basically you can see how it branches out. So you've got this kind of, this is basically the path of the Chiefly line. Obviously they are part of R1b. And the mutation M269, and then every single mutation goes on, and then you get a big clump, and there's about, I don't know, maybe 30 SNPs, which are mutations, where it says 50 at the side, and you can see a big list. And the main one there is BY61239. So if you're testing positive from that, or for that SNP, basically you are going to be descended from John Forbes, the Black Lip. And then we've got different branches that branch off, and these are kind of from his sons. So we were only able to identify 3 of the branches that come off. We do need to test more, and that comes down to doing the more traditional genealogy and then being able to then link Snips. And that's what this is showing now. So this basically shows you the different branches. So obviously we were able to identify Forbes of Keithak, and that's basically identified by is it Bertie Charles Forbes? I don't know if Bart can help out there, but he was the founder of the Forbes magazine, and basically we were able to identify that he was also part of the Palaeographic branch. And that kind of also shares common ancestry with Sir James Forbes, who we actually sequenced. And you can see that there's kind of 3 potential ancestors. We couldn't narrow it down to 1, but this SNP RTA 88237 happened either in Sir William Forbes, the first, Sir Alexander Forbes, second of Palaeographic, or William Forbes. And then it branched off into 2 separate lines from there. And then you've got the Keithak, and then you've got I think it's pronounced Niao. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it. Niao, is that right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
And you were right about Bertie Forbes. He was the father of Malcolm Forbes of the magazine dynasty. So that was his name was BC Forbes. He actually started the magazine, but his nickname was Bertie Forbes. Correct.
Yes. Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. And then obviously when you come to the center part where you've got Alexander the First, Lord Forbes, basically that takes you directly down to Malcolm. So the Lord, where it has an arrow going to Lord of Forbes, that takes you all the way down to Malcolm. And I did a bit of traditional genealogy, and I found Ian Forbes, and he only lives about 30 miles away from where I live, in County Durham, and contacted him. His son's an MP for Newcastle, which is the closest city to where I live. And I got in contact with him, and he was over the moon that I was conducting this type of research. And he actually was very happy to put a sample in, and then that allowed us to identify a SNP that either occurred in Alexander the First, Lord Forbes, or his son James II, and then that branched off to the Patrick Forbes. So you've got the course line, and then you've got the Craigie Var line as well. So he has 2 links. So Ian Forbes has 2 links to Malcolm. He has an autosomal link through a female line, but also a direct paternal line as well. And you'll see that Ian is Lord Forbes's closest autosomal DNA match when we get up the next chart. But yeah, what we can do is if we could get one of the course Forbes to test, so one of Andrew Forbes's sons, then we can split this branch where we've got kind of Patrick Forbes, of course, and obviously the Craigie Var branch. We'd be able to separate them if we could get Andrew's son. I think he's got 2 sons, if that's correct. I think Jamie said he had 2 sons, but I don't know what's happened with that. Yeah. So yeah, I think we're pretty ready for the next slide now. So yeah, so this is the autosomal DNA. So autosomal DNA is the DNA that we inherit 50% from each parent. And due to the process that this goes through, basically it gets jumbled up, and people would kind of assume, all right, so that means I've got 25% of DNA from each grandparent. Well, it doesn't work like that. So basically, you're definitely 50-50 from each parent, but you can inherit unequal amounts from each grandparent. So, for example, my daughter, from her 50% DNA that she's getting from me, it's actually 32% my father and only 18% my mother. And this is how we get variation. Genetic variation between siblings, and this is how we can get different traits. Some siblings, so if you take, for example, the two sons that I had with me when we visited, when everybody was up in Scotland, basically one son's blonde hair, blue eyes, and the other one's dark hair and brown eyes. So that's down to the fact that they've got different 50% of me and also different 50% of the mother. So that has a massive implication on who you're going to match. Okay, so you could be heavily one-sided to one kind of grandparent and matching people, and then also not very many matches on another kind of side of your grandparents. So therefore, you can sometimes not match any of your kind of recent cousins. It potentially could go back where you only maybe match 50% of your distant cousins and 50% fall off, yet you know it fits the paper trail and it's pretty solid. So what we do is we test as many people in our family as we can to kind of get around that. But anyway, so when we're looking at this is looking at the largest kind of segment of shared DNA between individuals that we tested. So for example, DDPFC, that's Lord Forbes, and then DDPFC2, that's Ian, who's his closest autosomal match, and they had a recent ancestor, I think it was the late 1700s, early 1800s, sorry, but their direct paternal line goes all the way back to John Forbes the Black Lip. So there's actually an intersection where a female Forbes and a male Forbes married. And that was quite common. You know, they would often marry their cousins or the second cousins at some point. And that's why we're getting this big autosomal DNA match there. And then everybody in green are quite closely related at some point. And it's really hard to pin down the common ancestor. So we can take, for example, my mother's on this, and she would be UDNAF*1, and she had a 6.9 cm match with Lord Forbes, and I think it's going to be through a Gordon ancestor, but it could be a group of different ancestors that are established around that same time period. So that's going back to kind of mid 1600s, and that's basically right at the cusp of kind of the threshold, the matching threshold. That's the problem with autosomal DNA, is that we can only really go back 350 years with any kind of degree of reliability. So those people that are matching red doesn't mean that they didn't have a common ancestor. It means that it was likely going to be, you know, before 1600s, and the DNA is just not going to match because of that recombination that I explained earlier, that it just gets diluted after every generation. And obviously it's really good to test. If you've got like grandparents still living, my advice is get them tested with the Family Finder or Ancestry DNA, which is an autosomal DNA test, and do that, you know, before they pass away, because you might want to test in the future, and they're not there. That's what happened with me. So my grandparents passed, and that's when I started getting into researching my lineages and doing the genetic testing. So I've kind of missed the boat on that one to kind of push it back a little bit further, but that's just the way it is. So take opportunities if you've got living grandparents or a great aunt. I was lucky enough to get my great uncle, who was a Sturry from Scotland, which is my paternal grandmother's younger brother, and I tested him, and I've learned a lot about our Sturry lineage, which was great got a lot of information there. So that's about the autosomal DNA. So yeah, this is basically just kind of recapping everything that I found, and these SNPs that we've identified. So the SNPs, the mutation, and it's often given a number. FTA88237 is a SNP, and it's most likely associated to Sir William Forbes I, or his son, which was Alexander, and or the next generation, which was another William Forbes. So we weren't able to identify exactly who it was, but it's got to be one of them three. Okay. And if we look at the next SNP, FTA 48699, and then also that there's another SNP associated with that, and we can't separate them at the minute, is FT 403715. That indicates descending from Alexander I, Lord Forbes, or his son, James II. It's likely that FTA 48699 occurred in Alexander, the first Lord Forbes, and then FT 403715 occurred in his son. But until we can identify other branches and then test, we can't isolate them SNPs. And that's basically what these are. These SNPs are isolating and basically assigned to certain individuals in the past. And eventually we might be able to, what we call a SNP progenitor. It means that we definitely know that that SNP happened in one individual. Then we with more testing, we might be able to do that. So it's just a case of being able to kind of recruit, get people tested, and then also people with the pedigrees that are proven are the really important ones, because if we can get them tested, we can then see for sure that these SNPs are in these individuals, which is in this case here. And then anybody that tests for them SNPs, we can say, yeah, you descend from this group of individuals or this individual, if we are able to identify a SNP progenitor. So that's where we're at. And obviously, it'll be great if we can recruit more. And obviously, the more data we get, the more the research grows, and hopefully be able to give people that can't bridge that gap, especially with the people in the States. A lot of the problem is getting that document that proves the link over, and you can't find it. So that's when the DNA comes in, really important, and you can bridge that gap by using DNA evidence with people that we've already got that are proven lineages through documentation that's already living in the British Isles or whatever. So that's kind of what we're doing, and we're looking at lots of noble lineages. So I mentioned here Seaton. There's actually been Bruce have been identified recently. I know Graham Holton's just recently identified that, and I think that's been put in the media, so you'd be able to find out about Robert the Bruce's SNPs. Yeah, there's loads. There's Hamiltons. I'm trying to do all of the Anglo-Normans and even those that haven't got Anglo-Norman names, but the key focus is on the Anglo-Normans, because they got invited in around about 1090, and between 1090 and kind of 1300, they took over a lot of the noble and baronies, and they ruled most of Scotland and owned most of the land. That's just the way it happened. So that's who we'll be focusing on. Is there any questions from anyone?
I have one just general question. How is this new technology affecting sort of what we know about, things like, the identity of women that, sort of got buried in the past, America being settled by the daughters and second sons of Scotland. Just what this is, revealing that we didn't really know so much about in the past.
So basically what we can tell from the DNA is, obviously when we're looking at females, we have to kind of look at mitochondrial DNA. I've basically focused on yDNA because I've been investigating the direct male line, but you can investigate the direct female lines through mitochondrial DNA. The only problem is surname changes.
Yeah.
Normally, historically, you'd take on your father's name, and that was his father's surname, and so forth and so forth. So obviously females tended to change their surname when they married their spouse. So that's really hard to kind of track. There's not much work involved in tracing female lines because of that complexity. And obviously, when I mentioned earlier about the autosomal DNA, it's really hard to trace back to the time when people started migrating from the British Isles over the pond to the US. You're kind of right on the threshold of that autosomal DNA. Obviously, if your ancestors kind of migrated around the 1600s, you might get some matches, you might not. And it's really hard to pin down. Obviously, if that migration was at a later date, you're increasing your chances of getting matches. So it's very complex, and most of the research is focusing on yDNA because of all of them kind of variables that I've mentioned. I don't know too much about the daughters of USA. I've heard something about it. There was a certain ship, wasn't there, that they came on, and they've been trying to trace descendants from that ship. I can't remember what I've been reading up about, to be fair, on that side, because it's not one of my research areas. But yeah,
Don't know, but it's fascinating.
Right. Yeah, so it's just an unfortunate situation with the surname changes that we can't really trace the female lines that well. So my advice would be, if you could find somebody that descends from your line, and then if they've got a living male, then get them tested. So if it's a Forbes, for example, that there's a female link, try to research to see if there's a living male descendant, and then get them to test. That's the best way to go about it. So I've managed to do that with several of my lines, where I've managed to trace a living male. So I did it with the Setons, because my Setons actually branch out to females, and that's how I did it with the Setons. So yeah, that's the way forward.
Okay, any other questions for Philip?
Yes, this is Cindy Dyer. Can you hear me?
Cindy.
Yes, I
thank
can
you.
hear you.
Oh, lovely. So if I understand you correctly, if our match would be older than 350 years, is it still worth our time to get a male in our family to test?
So the male needs to be a direct male. So what you would have to do, if you descend from a female, is look to see if that female had any brothers with the surname Forbes, and see if that line is then continued to the present date, and then ask that individual if they'd be happy to test. So let's say, for example, to really explain this, let's say you had your link was a Mary Forbes, and she was born in, 1716. Okay, and you wanted to test to find if that was part of the Chiefly lineage. See if that Mary Forbes had a string of brothers, so she might have had several brothers, and then research them lines back, and to see if there's a living male from one of them direct male lines. If there is, then you could ask them, would you be happy to take a yDNA test? Then yDNA test them, and then we'll be able to see if they match the Chiefly lineage or not. So it is combining traditional genealogy research with the genetics. So you'd have to do a bit of research first to see if you could find any that have survived from your branch, basically.
Okay, thank you so much for the answer. Appreciate it.
No problem.
Okay, Natalie?
Just a couple of quick ones. Somebody wanted to confirm your email address, Philip. And I got philip.stead2019 at Uni. Okay. So I put that out there.
Yeah. So basically, That's my university email address, and you can also send a private email if you wanted. It's Philip Stead, just with one L, and it's R1A, all lowercase. So Romeo 1 Alpha, and that's at outlook.com. But that should be on the Clan Forbes site. You should be able to find that if you look on the FTDNA Clan Forbes DNA project, or it should be on the Clan Forbes Society website as well. So there's them two email addresses. So one's my personal one, and one's also for my university email address.
Thank you. And I'll call you cousin Philip. I show up green to your mother's DNA.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Excellent.
Jim?
Yes, Leslie, or excuse me, Natalie, go ahead.
I had a kind of a two-part question. I just want to, this is going to seem like a stupid question. So if you're looking for that SNP, you will only have that if it's Forbes DNA you're testing, correct? You shouldn't have it unless you know there's a non-parental event.
Yeah. Yeah. So
right?
basically,
Okay.
yeah. So,
and then my next question is this. So, and I may just have to do it. I've got two separate Forbes lines that are both female, which obviously, and I've done a ton of genealogy. So I'm thinking it's just going to be better to test both lines. One of them I know should go back to the Patrick of Course line, or the Course line, and the other one I don't know. So it's just best to find a living Forbes then.
Yeah, so if you can trace somebody that's living from that same line and they're male, then get them tested and then see what the yDNA comes back as. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Bart?
Yeah, I just want to comment, no question. If you remember the first slide, there's a whole lot of haplogroups. Just because you don't have a direct lineage or a SNP from Lord Forbes does not mean that you are not a Forbes. And I just want to emphasize that because you saw the wide variety of types of SNPs or haplogroups within Forbes. You're all a Forbes. It'd be nice to track down some of your relatives that way, and that's where the genealogy and the DNA go hand in hand, and try to trace that back on paper as well as through DNA. And all of those haplogroups with the surname Forbes or the female line, we consider them all Forbes, and Lord Forbes has made that very clear. If you take a look at the website under sex, he welcomes anyone who believes themselves to be a Forbes, and we as a society recognize him as our clan chief. I just thought I'd throw that out.
Yeah, that's definitely the case, and it's the same for the majority of all the other kind of clans. A lot of people married in to the clan and then took the name on of that clan chief. So that's why you sometimes see other surnames associated with, other Snips. So what we've seen some people with a surname that isn't Forbes. So there's a Ferguson, for example, that actually has the SNP of the Chiefly line, but the surname's Ferguson. So it can go both ways.
Right. And in fact, at least we're not the McGregors. At one point, the McGregors were banned by the king, and so they couldn't use the McGregor name. So they had to snatch up any name. And then a couple of generations later, they had Ali all come free. So some took back the McGregor name.
Yeah,
so
some switched back. Yeah.
Is not very
exactly.
Philip, quick question. So if we want to take another sort of easy step, can we, without creating any work for you, plug in, take a test and have it sort of plotted in the scheme you showed? And what service would that be?
So what you would have to do is you'd have to test with family tree DNA. That's the best. That's the best way to go through. What I always recommend is, just go in at the kind of lowest resolution test, which is their Y37 test, and also wait for sales. There'll be holiday sales coming up very soon. DNA Day, which is going to be, I think, around about March time. they always have a significant sale then. It just depends on budget. Some people like to kind of just go in if you've got the budget and you can afford to go for the big Y700. That's what your ultimate goal wants to be, because that's what identifies all the private SNPs. Obviously, starting at Y37, I get a good basic idea of your what's called an STR signature, and I can kind of put you into a group. But I wouldn't be able to identify very specific information on the SNPs. So it's just, I recommend starting off basic, and then when sales come on, you can upgrade over time. But if you've got the budget and you're happy to kind of fork out the big Y700, it's quite expensive. That's what your ultimate goal wants to be.
Well, we're Forbeses, but we like a sale.
Good as everybody, definitely.
Roughly, what is the Y700, and what would be a good deal on that? Just ballpark.
Well, I think it's roughly about $450. But you can get it a little bit cheaper than that when it's in sale. To be fair, I've not looked at the prices for a long time.
That's close enough. Close enough.
Yeah. But yeah, if you just look at FTDNA, and then they've got everything on there, and then you can join the project as well.
Hey, hang on, guys. If you have your video off, I can't tell you one in, so it's a little hard. So it's hard for me to see your hands. So Bart, go ahead, and then I think John was down underneath. I can see talking now. We'll go with that.
Just quickly, the society is actually funded part of Philip's research. You can also contribute. Family Tree DNA has a fund that you can contribute to, and Philip has used that. And we, the society, contribute. We also had other anonymous donors who I know who they are, but you can contribute to the cost of having the DNA test done. We're trying to get the big Y as many as possible. So if you can afford to contribute to the fund, we'd love that. If you can't afford it, but you want to do it, let Philip know. You can contact him either directly or through the Family Tree DNA site, or let me know. And we have contributed in the past to the fund of this project, and we encourage your support as well. Right, Philip?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. John Fordyce, did you have a comment?
What to know? Who are you?
Okay, we're having a little difficulty hearing you. If you can, maybe use the chat off to the side, and maybe we can get your answer. Any other questions for Philip? Comments or concerns?
Yes, this is Alden Forbes in Spokane, Washington.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, we were just invited by my first cousin, Kip, who I'm sure is a member of the society and is probably known to many of you here. This is my wife and I, Cindy's first meeting. I am the son of Wallace Forbes, who was the brother of Malcolm Forbes, who we were talking about earlier. I'm the grandson of BC Forbes. And I think Philip, my dad, Wallace, who passed away about 3.5 years ago at the ripe old Scottish age of 91, had participated
Yes.
in the DNA test. And because we're so new to this, and I'm not familiar with genealogy, is it possible for us to get into that research and become kind of more familiar with the results? And I believe we're part of the Pitts-Lago, William Forbes, Sir Alexander Forbes lineage.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to access that and maybe get with you offline and figure out how to do that and participate. The other point to make is if it would be of value for either myself or our sons, one of whom is named Alexander, to participate, we would be happy to do that too. But this is great, and I appreciate the warm welcome.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So basically, if you want it, drop me an email anytime, and then I can go through the results and what I found. I managed to trace your ancestry back to Keithack, which is up in Aberdeenshire.
Yep.
And it's not too far from New Deer, where I believe is where Bertie's buried. Did he not get brung back?
Yes, reinterred in 1988.
Yeah.
And my cousin Kip was kind of very instrumental in that. And my wife and I were actually there for that, as was Wallace, and my sister Alex. So we have fond memories. I'm in my office here. I've got a group photo. I don't know if it'll come through or not. That was taken in the house where BC was born. So I don't know if you can see that or not, and recognize that. Yeah. So there we are. So anyway, I just wanted to introduce myself and let you know if there's anything we can do besides what's already been mentioned to help out. Then we're happy to do that.
Yeah, if you drop me an email, and I can basically kind of give you loads of information about how I reached my conclusions and everything that I kind of found out. And then if you did want to test, there's probably not going to be much that we could actually get from that, apart from maybe identifying a SNP that specifically identifies Bertie by comparing your yDNA with Wallace's. So
sure,
if you wanted to do that, then that's great to kind of have for the future. So any future descendants, if they wanted to test in the future and then trace back to Bertie exactly, then they would have that in record then. So if you wanted to do that, I could talk to you about how that would actually go about. So that's totally up to yourselves. But yeah, there's quite a bit of research that I managed to conclude, and it was great. So nice to meet you as well. So,
yes, thank you. Appreciate the time.
Hello, I'm Sharon Lee, and I'm a Sligo cousin, as is Robert, who is, I don't know if he's still in the meeting, and Bob Forbes out of Pitt County, North Carolina. So we're all your cousins.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Nice to meet you.
One big happy clan.
Yeah.
Even a little resemblance there.
Yeah. Apparently so. I'm not sure where that crept in.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, I'm looking around here trying to see if I got anybody else for questions for Philip. I'm looking. I have to go. It's great because I got to click over and get everybody because my computer screen's not that big, and we have so many participants. So thank you everybody for attending. Okay, Philip, any closing comments?
Oh, well, it's just been an honor to be involved in this. And obviously I've got Forbes ancestry myself. So it's been great being part of it. And obviously we're just hoping to continue the growth, because I think it's fantastic, the research that we're doing. And just to re-emphasize what Bart mentioned earlier, is the fact is that there is a lot of yDNA diversity within the clan. And we're observing that in other Scottish clans. So it seems to be a typical kind of pattern that happens. And just to remember that just because your yDNA might not match does not mean that you're not a member of that clan, because that's not the case. The case is there is diversity, and that's being observed in every clan that we're researching at the moment anyway. So yeah, it just means that you're not directly descended from the chieftain line, and it could be through a female that you are descended, or could be that your early ancestor joined the clan very early on and took on the name. And what you've got to remember is they didn't start introducing surnames in Britain until after the Normans came. So surnames generally started being introduced around about 1100 to 1300 AD. So, keep that in mind as well. So, yeah.